Happiness can feel like the simplest pursuit, yet it often masks the unexpected. For one couple, their dreams of a bright future turned into an unimaginable nightmare the moment they stepped into their home. A young man pulls his girlfriend from their car and leads her to another vehicle parked in the driveway. The girl hesitates, peering inside. Blood. Her eyes freeze on the sight of it. But before she can make sense of the horror, he drags her into the house. What awaits her inside is far worse, searing words into her mind that she would never forget. Would you like something like this to happen to you? This story isn't about her, but about what she saw. A seemingly perfect life destroyed. A home filled with love and plans for the future left silent, its walls stained with secrets and violence. A young couple with everything to live for, now the victims of a crime so brutal that detectives would be haunted by it for decades. For 25 years, the truth remained hidden, wrapped in fear, deception, and betrayal. What happened inside that house, and why? The answers reveal a story no one could have imagined. In a quiet corner of Ottawa County, Michigan, a young girl named Gail Wyngarden grew up in a family of 8. Her childhood was modest. Her parents worked hard to provide, and though money was often tight, their home was filled with love and care. Gail's determined spirit emerged early. She spoke to her older sister Cheryl about her dreams of independence, how she wanted to work hard and build a life where she could have anything she desired. As a teenager, Gail found her first job as a server. It wasn't glamorous, but Gail turned every shift into an opportunity. Her charm, infectious smile, and warm personality quickly made her a favorite among customers. She earned more in tips than most of her colleagues, and even as a teenager, her focus and drive were unmistakable. But Gail wasn't just hardworking. She was beautiful, kind, and deeply cherished by her family. Her older brother Ryan was particularly protective, always looking out for her. Their bond seemed unshakable. Then, in 1984, Gail met Rick Brink, and everything changed. Rick, a contractor 6 years her senior, had built his reputation as reliable and driven. His talent with his hands extended beyond carpentry. He had a knack for making others feel at ease. People trusted Rick, not just for his work, but for his steady, dependable nature. Their meeting was serendipitous. Gail and Rick clicked instantly, and it wasn't long before they were inseparable. Rick told his mother shortly after meeting Gail, "She's the one, I'm going to marry her." Gail too felt the connection. She realized her previous relationship was nothing compared to what she had with Rick. Their love wasn't just a spark, it was a flame that grew brighter with time. They spent the summer at Rick's family lake house, boating, laughing, and sharing dreams about their future. Rick brought out a carefree side of Gail that her family had rarely seen. In April 1986, on Gail's 21st birthday, the couple tied the knot in a cozy church, surrounded by friends and family. Their wedding was a picture-perfect celebration of love. After their honeymoon, Rick and Gail settled into a life filled with hope and excitement. They poured their energy into renovating a house Rick's father had purchased for them, a fixer-upper on 20 acres of land. Together, they sanded floors, painted walls, and envisioned a future where their home would be filled with the laughter of children. Gail spoke excitedly to her sister about the nursery she wanted to create, down to the wallpaper and the perfect crib. Rick and Gail didn't just work hard, they dreamed big. Their love story, filled with laughter and shared goals, seemed destined for a happy ending. But life often has other plans. It started as a joyous weekend. On the evening of November 21, 1987, Gail and Rick Brink attended a friend's wedding. They spent the evening laughing, dancing, and celebrating with loved ones, a perfect reflection of the happiness they shared in their own marriage. By 11 p.m., the couple said their goodbyes and left for home, a modest house they had been renovating together. It was the last time anyone saw them alive. 2 days later, on the morning of November 23rd, alarm bells began to ring. Rick, a reliable employee at a local furniture manufacturing company, failed to show up for work. He hadn't called in sick, and no one had heard from him. This was highly unusual. Gail also didn't appear at her job that day. Calls to the Brink home went unanswered, and by late morning, Rick's parents and his boss, now deeply concerned, decided to check on the couple. When they arrived at the Brink residence, Rick's Chevrolet Blazer was parked in the driveway. For a moment, it seemed like a reassuring sign. Perhaps the couple had overslept or were unwell. But as Rick's father approached the vehicle, the relief quickly turned to horror. Peering through the window, he saw Rick slumped over in the driver's seat, motionless. Blood was smeared across the interior. Rick had been shot twice in the head, his body leaning toward the passenger seat, lifeless. Stunned and afraid of what they might find inside, Rick's parents called the police instead of entering the house. When law enforcement arrived, they cautiously entered through the front door. The house was eerily quiet. The officers moved down the hallway toward the master bedroom. There, they found Gail. She was lying in bed, her head covered by a pillow. At first glance, it seemed she might have been sleeping, until they lifted the pillow and uncovered a horrifying scene. Blood soaked the bedding, and Gail had been shot 3 times in the face at close range. The brutality was staggering. Detectives immediately began piecing together the scene. Rick appeared to have been attacked first, likely while sitting in his car. One of the shots shattered the passenger side window, leaving glass scattered inside. Gail's murder seemed deliberate and personal, her face concealed with a pillow. A detail investigators would later note as significant. But beyond the physical carnage, something about the scene felt calculated. There were no signs of forced entry. The house was untouched, with nothing out of place except for the bloodied bed. Rick's wallet, containing cash, sat on the kitchen counter, undisturbed. Gail's jewelry remained in plain sight, untouched. This wasn't a robbery. Initial theories included the possibility of a murder-suicide. Perhaps an argument had spiraled out of control and Rick had shot Gail before taking his own life. But this theory was quickly dismissed when no weapon was found on the scene. The absence of the murder weapon meant someone else had carried out these killings and taken the gun with them. Investigators combed the house for evidence, but they came up empty-handed. There were no foreign fingerprints, no hairs, and no other physical evidence that could point to a suspect. The meticulousness of the crime only added to its chilling nature. Whoever had done this had planned it well, leaving no trace behind. As officers worked the scene, the question loomed: who could have wanted this young, happy couple dead, and why? The answers, as investigators would soon discover, were far more complex and far darker than anyone could have imagined. With no clear evidence and no witnesses, the investigation into the murders of Gail and Rick Brink faced an uphill battle from the start. Detectives worked tirelessly to identify a suspect, and their first lead came from someone in Gail's past, her ex-boyfriend, Lar. Lar and Gail's relationship had ended badly. Their breakup was marked by an incident of violence when Lar, in a fit of rage, struck Gail, leaving her with a black eye. Gail's brother Ryan had intervened, delivering a harsh warning to Lar never to harm his sister again. It wasn't hard for investigators to imagine that Lar might have harbored lingering resentment toward Gail, especially after she married Rick and moved on with her life. When detectives questioned Lar, he denied any involvement in the murders. To verify his claims, he willingly took a polygraph test, which he passed. Additionally, Lar had an airtight alibi for the night of November 21, 1987. He was quickly ruled out as a suspect, leaving investigators back at square one. Next, attention turned to the house itself and its previous owner. The Brink residence had an unusual history. Before Rick and Gail moved in, the property belonged to a man known locally as Shotgun Sit. He was a member of a notorious Detroit motorcycle gang involved in drug trafficking, illegal arms deals, and other criminal activities. Detectives considered the possibility that the murders were a case of mistaken identity, a hit meant for the previous owner. Perhaps someone had targeted the house, unaware that a young, innocent couple now lived there. Shotgun Sit was questioned extensively and expressed his own suspicions that the murders might have been intended for him or his associates. He recounted multiple threats and even assassination attempts against him during his time in the house. Detectives followed this lead for weeks, delving into the gang's activities and interviewing associates. But after thorough investigation, they found no evidence connecting the gang to the Brink murders. Another promising lead went cold. As weeks turned into months, another theory emerged. One that struck fear into the hearts of the small Holland, Michigan community. Just a few miles from the Brink home, 2 unsolved murders had occurred over the previous decade. In 1977, 20-year-old Deborah Polinsky was found brutally stabbed in her bedroom. 10 years later, on Christmas Eve in 1987, just weeks after Rick and Gail's murders, Deborah Wilson, 30, was discovered in a field near her home, also stabbed to death. Both crimes bore the hallmarks of a deeply personal attack, and both women had lived within close proximity to the Brink residence. Could a serial killer be at work in the area? The similarities in the cases were hard to ignore, but detectives could find no concrete evidence to link them. Still, the idea of a killer lurking in their midst sent waves of fear through the community. Neighbors locked their doors and windows at night. Families avoided leaving their homes after dark. And all the while, detectives faced mounting pressure to solve the case. Months turned into years, and despite their best efforts, investigators reached a dead end. The lack of physical evidence, combined with the meticulous nature of the crime, left them with little to work with. The Brink murders faded into the background, becoming just another unsolved mystery in the files of the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. For the families of Gail and Rick, the pain of losing their loved ones was compounded by the lack of answers. Who had committed such a brutal crime? And why? For the next 2 decades, those questions would remain unanswered. For over 2 decades, the murders of Gail and Rick Brink remained a haunting mystery. The case, with its lack of physical evidence and promising leads, had long gone cold. But in 2009, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department created a specialized cold case unit. Its mission was clear: revisit unsolved crimes, armed with new techniques, fresh eyes, and a determination to bring justice to victims and their families. Detectives Dave Blakely and Venus Repper, seasoned investigators who had worked together for years, took on the Brink murders. Their approach was methodical. First, they combed through the old case files, paying close attention to witness statements and overlooked details. They believed that time could be their greatest ally. Over the years, loyalties change, guilt grows heavier, and the fear of keeping dark secrets begins to fade. As they revisited interviews, one name stood out: Ryan Wyngarden, Gail's older brother. His initial testimony from 1987 raised questions. Ryan had told investigators that he called Gail on the afternoon of November 22, the day after the wedding, but received no answer. At first glance, this seemed to align with the timeline of her death, but something about his account struck the detectives as off. Ryan had also mentioned a heated argument with his sister in the weeks leading up to the murders. Gail had lent him money for a car, but tensions arose when Ryan failed to repay her. There were also disagreements about their parents' mobile home, which Ryan wanted to place on Gail and Rick's property. Could these conflicts have escalated into something darker? Detectives decided to re-interview Ryan, but he wasn't their only focus. His wife, Pam, was also brought in. Back in 1987, Pam had provided Ryan with an alibi, claiming they spent the entire night of November 21 together. But upon closer inspection, her original statement had inconsistencies. When asked during a polygraph test if she had been with Ryan the entire night, Pam hesitated, answering no. At the time, this discrepancy was overlooked, but now it stood out as a thread worth pulling. Blakely and Repper questioned Pam again, hoping that the passage of time might lead her to reveal more. Pam maintained the same story. She and Ryan had gone to a laundromat that evening, stopped at a friend's house to borrow some money, and then returned home, spending the rest of the night together. But something about her demeanor suggested she was holding back. The detective suspected that fear might have kept her silent all these years. Determined to dig deeper, Blakely and Repper turned their attention to Ryan's relationships and behavior. They began interviewing people who had been close to him at the time of the murders. One of these interviews proved to be a breakthrough. Ryan's ex-girlfriend, Crystal Band, revealed something chilling. According to Crystal, Ryan had treated Gail differently from his other sisters. He often made inappropriate comments about her appearance and seemed to harbor feelings that went far beyond brotherly affection. But Crystal's most shocking revelation came when she described a conversation she had with Ryan shortly after Gail's death. Ryan had confessed to her that he had an intimate relationship with Gail that began when she was just 9 years old and he was 12. He claimed that their relationship had been consensual until the last time when Gail told him no, and he forced her. This information turned the investigation on its head. It painted a picture of Ryan as a man with deeply troubling feelings toward his younger sister, feelings that may have festered into resentment and anger when Gail married Rick and distanced herself from the family. Detectives now had reason to believe that Ryan wasn't just a protective older brother. He might be the person who ended Gail and Rick's lives. But suspicions weren't enough. Blakely and Repper needed concrete evidence to tie Ryan to the crime. They decided to re-interview his family members, hoping to uncover more pieces of the puzzle. It was a slow, deliberate process, but every conversation brought them closer to the truth. Ryan's wife Pam remained the key. If she could finally break her silence, the detectives believed they might have a chance to solve the case once and for all. But after 25 years of silence, would Pam have the courage to speak out? Detectives turned to Gail's older sister, Cheryl, for additional context. Cheryl had always been close to Gail, but she admitted she had no idea about Ryan's disturbing behavior. When detectives shared Crystal's revelations with Cheryl, she was horrified. Cheryl began to piece together memories that now seemed to take on a new and sinister meaning. At Gail and Rick's funeral, Cheryl recalled Ryan making odd comments. He had described in detail how the perpetrator must have walked through the house, entered the bedroom, and seen Gail lying in bed. At the time, Cheryl thought it was his way of expressing grief, but now those words felt more like the musings of someone who had been there. She also remembered Ryan suddenly reaching out to her after years of estrangement, asking to reconcile their differences. It felt like an attempt to regain control over the narrative. As detectives pressed further, they uncovered more alarming details. Family members and friends shared stories of Ryan's obsessive behavior. He had gone through Gail's personal belongings after her death, burning letters she had received from other men. He even offered to sell the waterbed where Gail had been killed, a bizarre and unsettling act. Piece by piece, a picture was forming of a man whose relationship with his sister had crossed every boundary and who couldn't accept losing her to a new life with Rick. But it was Pam, Ryan's wife, who held the key to unlocking the full truth. For years, she had maintained a fabricated alibi, insisting she and Ryan were together the entire night of the murders. But under increasing pressure and a renewed investigation, Pam finally broke her silence. During a grueling 3-hour interrogation, she admitted that Ryan had forced her to lie all these years. Pam revealed that after they returned home from the laundromat on the evening of November 21, Ryan had left the house. He didn't come back until the early hours of the next morning. When he returned, Pam was horrified to find him crying, his clothes blood-stained. Ryan confessed to her that he had killed Gail and Rick. He told her they had argued that night, first about the money he owed Gail, and then about the mobile home he wanted to place on their property. Rick had told him to leave, and Gail had retreated to the bedroom. Ryan left, but his rage consumed him. He returned under the pretense that his car wouldn't start and asked Rick to help him. When Rick leaned toward the car, Ryan shot him twice in the head. He then entered the house, where Gail lay in bed, and shot her 3 times in the face. Pam described how Ryan dragged her to the Brink house later that night. He forced her to look at the scene of the murders, warning her that if she ever told anyone what she knew, the same fate would befall her and her son. He then showed her the .22 caliber revolver he had used, along with a bag of blood-stained clothes. Overwhelmed by fear, Pam complied with everything Ryan demanded, including crafting the false alibi she would repeat for decades. Pam's confession painted a harrowing picture of a man who had not only taken 2 lives, but also manipulated and controlled those around him to maintain his lies. It was a web of deceit, fear, and violence, carefully constructed and maintained for over 25 years. But with her testimony, the truth about what happened to Gail and Rick Brink was finally beginning to come to light. Pam's confession was the breakthrough detectives had been waiting for, and it gave them the evidence they needed to take action. On a cold January day in 2013, Ryan Wyngarden was arrested at his home. His reaction was anything but calm. Detectives described him as erratic and belligerent, shouting accusations at them and denying any involvement in his sister's murder. Ryan's behavior following his arrest only reinforced suspicions about his guilt. While in custody, he left a series of increasingly bizarre voicemail messages for Detective Dave Blakely. In one call, he lashed out, calling police a necessary evil while accusing them of coercing Pam into betraying him. In another, he threatened to sue the department for what he claimed was harassment. These messages, filled with contradictions and anger, painted a portrait of a man unraveling under the weight of his secrets. When Ryan's trial began, the courtroom became a stage for years of lies and manipulation to be exposed. The most damning testimony came from Pam. In painstaking detail, she recounted how Ryan had returned home covered in blood, confessed to the murders, and forced her to participate in his cover-up. Her courage in coming forward after decades of silence gave the prosecution a powerful advantage. Other key pieces of evidence supported Pam's story. Investigators presented Ryan's history of controlling behavior, his disturbing comments about Gail, and his attempts to destroy her personal belongings after her death. Witnesses, including family members and former friends, testified about his erratic behavior and inappropriate fixation on his sister. The defense attempted to undermine Pam's credibility, suggesting she had fabricated her story under pressure from police. But the sheer weight of the evidence, combined with Ryan's inability to account for his whereabouts on the night of the murders, left the jury with little doubt. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was delivered. Ryan Wyngarden was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sentencing was swift, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Gail and Rick's families, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had finally been served, but it could never erase the decades of pain and loss. The conviction brought an end to a case that had haunted the community for 25 years. Ryan's arrest and sentencing offered closure, not just to the families of Gail and Rick, but to a town that had lived in the shadow of this tragedy for far too long. It was a reminder that, no matter how much time passes, justice can prevail when people are willing to speak the truth. The murders of Gail and Rick Brink left scars that stretched far beyond the crime scene. For their families, the pain of losing 2 beloved individuals was compounded by decades of unanswered questions. Holidays, milestones, and everyday moments passed, each one a stark reminder of the bright futures that were stolen. It took immense courage for those closest to the truth to come forward. Pam's decision to finally break her silence was a turning point, not just for justice, but for herself. Her bravery gave a voice to the victims and ensured that the person responsible for this horrific crime would never hurt anyone else again. It's a reminder that even in the face of fear, the truth has the power to bring justice. This case also highlights the tireless efforts of investigators who refuse to let it fade into obscurity. The creation of a cold case unit and the determination of detectives Blakely and Repper proved that time doesn't diminish the value of justice. Instead, it provides new opportunities for truth to emerge. How many other secrets, like the ones surrounding Gail and Rick Brink's deaths, remain buried? How many families are still waiting for answers? These questions are a stark reminder of the resilience of justice and the importance of persistence in uncovering the truth. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories like this one, ensuring that the memories of victims are honored and the pursuit of justice is never forgotten. Thank you for watching.